Repeat his vitals in an hour, the surgeon said. In an hour. Michael Doyle would not have had a pressure to repeat. Denise Okafor looked at the clock. 2:14 a.m. 4 people had written the same number into this chart since noon. Not one of them had picked up a phone. There was a piece of chalk in her scrub pocket, worn smooth at one end. By the end of this shift, she'd give it away. 12 hours earlier, none of it had a name yet. Meridian General's surgical unit ran on a rhythm built entirely around Dr. Leonard Marsh's schedule. Marsh was 54. 19 years at Meridian. Fastest laparoscopic times in the state. A technique named half after him in 2 textbooks. Residents still adjusted their posture when he walked past. Everyone did. A traveling nurse's contract had ended 18 months ago over what Marsh called excessive escalation, twice in one shift. About a patient who turned out, in the end, to be fine. She packed her locker that Thursday. The floor learned the rule without anyone writing it down. A borderline number needed 3 people to agree on it, before anybody actually picked up a phone. In 3 weeks, Marsh was giving the keynote at the hospital's annual gala, where the development office had already printed what he'd say about the nomination he was up for, a visiting professorship that required a complication rate clean enough to put on a slide. Denise Okafor read charts twice. Once fast, for the shape of the story. Once slow, for the sentence that didn't fit it. 4 years on this floor, and nobody had ever asked her why she did it that way. Or why she rolled a piece of chalk between 2 fingers during the slow patches of a shift, without seeming to notice she was doing it. Michael Doyle's first question after his laparoscopic bowel resection was whether the hospital gown came in a version that actually covered his knees. 45. A contractor with a bad hip and 2 kids waiting at a lake house, home by August, he'd promised. His wife went home that evening to relieve the babysitter, promising she'd be back first thing. Michael's numbers started climbing at noon, on Jenna Ruiz's watch. She charted the heart rate, the fever, patient reports increasing pain, guarding on exam, and at 2:30 she pulled the resident in to look. Priya Basu. A second year 6 weeks into an off-service surgical rotation. Read the numbers off the monitor out loud, 112, 100.4, and said, "He's 2 days out. That's normal for 2 days out." Before moving on to the next room. By 3, Jenna's shift was ending. His heart rate hadn't dropped below 105 in 4 hours. She mentioned it to the charge nurse, who nodded, said she'd flag it for the evening team, and got pulled into a different room's emergency before she ever did. The evening nurse picked it up from there. By the time her own shift was ending at 11, Michael's abdomen, when she pressed gently at the incision site, was tighter than it should have been. She charted that too, precisely, and assumed the day team already had it handled. Nobody had. Denise came on at 11 and found the resident's note first. "He's 2 days out. That's normal for 2 days out." Underneath it, hours of numbers that disagreed. She'd read a line like that before. It hadn't been a chart. It had been a note from a principal, and she'd believed it. She found the evening nurse in the med room, coat already half on. "His heart rate's been over 110 since noon," Denise said. "Did you call it into Marsh yourself?" The resident saw him. "She said it was expected." "That's not what I asked." The nurse paused long enough that the answer was already there before she said it. "No, I didn't call him myself." "Did anyone?" Neither of them knew. 4 people had looked at the same number since noon, and each one had assumed somebody else was already carrying it forward. Denise went to check on Michael herself. His heart rate was 118. His abdomen was tender, not yet rigid. His fever held at 101. Borderline, not yet the kind of number that survived a call to Marsh, on its own. "If this isn't better by midnight," she told him, "I'm calling somebody, and I don't care whose sleep I ruin doing it." Michael laughed, weakly, and said he'd hold her to it. She meant to recheck at midnight. A new admission in bed 9 ate the better part of 2 hours instead. On her way back, she stopped, Out of habit and not because anyone had paged her. At the room of a quiet 19-year-old down the hall. He was a car accident patient who'd never once used his call button. Because he'd told her once, embarrassed, that he didn't want to be the kind of person who bothered people. "You still up?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep even if I wanted to," he said, and didn't ask her to stay, and didn't have to. She checked on him every hour instead of every 4. Because she'd learned a long time ago that the quiet ones were rarely the ones with nothing wrong. Standing in his doorway at 1:15, she remembered what she'd promised Michael, and how late she already was. For that stretched hour, she'd been exactly the 5th person in this chart who let a deadline slide because something else felt more urgent in the moment. It was 1:22 by the time she got back to him. His skin was wrong. That was the first thing, not the numbers, the skin. Cold and wet under her palm. He flinched before she'd even touched it. "On a scale of 1 to 10, she said. "Where's the pain?" 9, he said, through his teeth. "It wasn't this bad yesterday. Nobody seems worried, so I figured I was just being." He stopped, breathing through another wave of it. "Michael." Denise said his name flat. The way she used to pull a distracted kid's eyes back to the front of a room. "Not how bad. When did it change?" "An hour ago. Maybe less." He said it like the speed scared him. "You're not being anything," Denise said. "I'm about to make this look like a much bigger deal than anyone's made it seem so far." "That's because IT is one." At 1:34, she paged the on-call resident. At 1:52, she paged again. At 2:04, the operator told her he was tied up in a code on the 5th floor. At 2:12, she paged rapid response herself, without waiting for anyone's permission. At 2:14, she called Dr. Marsh. His pressure's dropping. Heart rate's 130. Abdomen's rigid. And the fever's climbed with no clear source since noon, Denise said. "I think we're looking at a leak. I need an emergency CT and general surgery backup right now." "Who saw him at noon?" Marsh said. "My resident cleared him this afternoon." "Your resident cleared him at 2:30, Denise said. "That was 12 hours ago, and he was already climbing when she said it." "Repeat his vitals in an hour," Marsh said, and the line went quiet like he considered that the end of it. "The response team's already moving," Denise said. "I'm calling you because a leak isn't something they can fix. Do it, and we'll be having a very different conversation at 8. "Then I'll see you at 8, Denise said, and hung up. The on-call resident rounded the corner just as she set the phone down. Finally freed from the code on 5. "Was that Marsh?" "It was. You hung up on him." "I did." Denise called the blood bank next, and asked what it would take to have 2 units ready the second somebody wrote the order. "He'll have your badge by morning. Then he can have it at 8, Denise said. If you like stories about the people institutions forget to listen to, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The response team arrived inside 3 minutes, a resident, a respiratory therapist, an ICU charge nurse already prepping for transfer before anyone asked her to. 2 large bore lines went in within the first minute. A liter of saline wide open, and Michael's pressure climbed just enough to survive 8 minutes in a scanner. The CT showed a leak at the anastomosis site, a seam in the bowel repair that hadn't fully sealed, quietly spilling contents into his abdomen for the better part of a day, while the floor waited for someone else's authority to act on it. Marsh called back 4 minutes later. "I'm coming in." He went to the OR at 3:40 a.m. for a washout and repair. Marsh did the surgery himself, silent and fast, in a way that said more about how worried he actually was than anything he'd said on the phone. Michael came out stable, and by morning his numbers had finally started moving the right direction. His wife arrived at 6, still in yesterday's clothes. "How long was it happening?" she asked. Denise told her the truth. It took 11 words. Marsh found Denise at the nurse's station afterward, sleep deprived, some of the smoothness stripped off him. "You went over my residence assessment," he said. "Your residence assessment was 12 hours old and getting worse," Denise said. "I went over the clock. Not over you. Do you have any idea what a nomination like mine depends on? Then it's a good thing you got to him before it became something worse than a complication, Denise said. 4 people wrote down the same number today. I'm the only one who called it what it was. You could have escalated this quietly. I did. To you. At 2 in the morning. You told me to wait an hour. Denise didn't raise her voice either. I wasn't going to bet a man's life on which of us was more right about the pace of this floor. Marsh didn't have an answer for that. Priya found Denise in the supply room an hour later, still pale. I told her it was normal for 2 days out. I've been running that sentence back all morning. You were 6 weeks off service with a man who got a nurse's contract ended for paging him twice in a shift, Denise said. You said what the floor trained you to say. How do you not do that? Default to whoever's above you? I used to, Denise said. She went quiet a second longer than restocking gauze required. And Priya noticed, and didn't push. The unit director convened a review that week, the escalation pathway, start to finish. Michael's chart held 14 hours of trending vitals that 4 clinicians had each individually seen. And each assumed somebody else was handling. When someone asked what would have stopped it, Denise said one thing. Whoever charts it, says it out loud. To a name. Within a month. That was the rule. Any nurse who charted 2 consecutive concerning vitals had to read them aloud to the attending or resident on record. With a verbal acknowledgement logged. 2 more nurses came forward that week with their own stories of numbers flagged and never personally escalated on Marsh's unit. Going back over a year. It was always the same shape, a resident's early reassurance. A day of climbing vitals. And nobody willing to be the second call. The evening nurse who'd first felt his rigid abdomen, never came to that review, and never said a word about it to Denise directly. Denise knew who she was. She never named her either. Jenna asked to be the one to present the new rule at the next staff meeting. In the same room that had watched a nurse lose her contract 18 months earlier, for doing, twice in a shift, exactly what every nurse on the floor was now told to do by name. Nobody laughed this time. His gala speech, 10 days later, made no mention of a clean quarter. The nomination went to someone in Cleveland by spring. Marsh never brought it up again. I used to teach 5th grade, Denise told Priya, a few days later. Both of them logging supplies at the cart. 26 kids. There was a boy, Marcus, who kept asking to go to the bathroom 4-5 times a class. I marked it as avoidance. His mom worked doubles. The number on file was disconnected, and the school nurse had it written down as anxiety. I flagged it anyway, 4 times over 2 months. The principal said the same thing every time, somebody's monitoring it, it's being handled. I believed her. Because that's what you do when someone above you says it's handled. What happened? Marcus went into diabetic ketoacidosis on a Tuesday, during silent reading. Asterisk, somebody's monitoring it, asterisk had never actually meant anybody specific. Denise turned a supply box over in her hands. He lived. Came back 5 weeks later with an insulin pump on his belt, like it was a badge. I cleaned out my desk that June. I took one thing. Priya didn't say anything right away. Then, I did the same thing yesterday. You did what the whole system trained you to do, Denise said. You can't hire your way out of this. Somebody has to have a name. Michael went home 12 days later, walking out under his own power, and sent the unit a fruit basket with a card that just said, "Thank you for actually calling it in." Denise gave the chalk to Priya on the resident's last day of rotation, set it on the counter next to her coffee and said, "Something to keep in your pocket." Priya didn't ask what it meant. She put it in her white coat, and never took it out again. She was the one who finally called it in at 2:14, but she'd also been the one, hours earlier, who'd told herself midnight could wait. It took nearly losing that lesson all over again, on her own watch, to prove she could still be the one who did. Even a little late. Even having almost been exactly the 5th name missing from that chart. If a warning is sitting in a chart, an email thread, or a group text right now, And everyone assumes somebody else already raised it. You might be the only name that's actually missing. Have you ever assumed somebody else had already said something? Tell us in the comments.